Okay, yeah, we're gonna throw one more delaying thing before I actually start tackling JJ and the rest. A little look insight into the production of the original show. And some of this carried over to next gen, but largely it was mostly an original show because they're still trying to set things up, and has to do in the example of John D.F. Black and his originally coming on as associate producer and script editor, story editor. He was hired early on. It was like started in like March of '66. He started in. He was hired along with Harlan Ellison was given his assignment for City that you've heard about at the same time. And the thing, his job was to work with the writers and make whip these things into shape so they can make usable scripts out of them. And the main example is the episode "The Naked Time." Now, this one went through a very bizarre history here, because it's like there was kind of things were not handled right originally, because his first draft in his mind was really a preliminary draft. It wasn't really a first draft, but Roddenberry saw it as a first draft and then went off with it. And at some point it was tacked on to a cliffhanger ending where the Enterprise is going through a time warp, but where's it going to wind up? Tune in next week. That was reworked, obviously. The standard legend was that it was going to lead into Tomorrow's Yesterday. And it's easy to see where the conclusion is, but the problem is the timeline doesn't line up. Because of when Dorothy Fontana got assigned and when these things happen, it's just nothing matches up with this being possible. And the cliffhanger idea wasn't even originally in the original pitch. It was kind of a late addition. And then about a month and a half later, they had to go back and redo, delete it and work around the existing footage. Mainly just do some pickup shots, mainly with just Kirk and Spock on the bridge. Explain what we have 3 days to live over again, not those last 3 days, and eliminate the thing of, well, let's see when we end up. I just get rid of all the extraneous stuff. So there's still there may be some deleted scenes out there to be found yet of the original ending. But it was about when they were wrapping up Dagger of the Mind. And then came out, okay, yeah, we got to do a couple of pickup shots. Where we were doing the ending of that one we did a couple months ago. Which means that the last bits were Vince McEvedy directed instead of Mark Daniels, who did the bulk of Naked Time. But it's a combination of things that kind of pointed out of why sometimes Roddenberry was justified in going in and rewriting scripts over the weekend. Because instead of giving the guy notes and stuff, this was very close to when they needed to be, because the first draft, you wanted like at least a week, and he was like really cutting it close there. And just, we ain't got time, in Roddenberry's opinion, we got so much stuff going on. I ain't got time to negotiate with writers about rewriting their works. That ain't that precious, okay? Just take the thing himself, do it, And of course, John D.F. Black was a very esteemed writer at that point. He won a Writers Guild Award for an episode of Mr. Novak that he'd done earlier in '66. He was very reluctant to rewrite other writers' work. His thing was to work with the writers and have them rewrite itself. But I think it was felt like Roddenberry, I think, is like he's working on his own script and he hasn't got time to do the other stuff, or he's doing their stuff and not having time to work on his own script. It's like maybe a combination thereof. And Roddenberry's opinion, I know this show, but it's my show. I know it better than any of those other guys. I'm going to just do it myself and be done with it. And again, he rewrote everybody, but you don't see his writing credits very often on the show. He's in his role as the producer, so he's just doing himself and be done with it. So that's the case. So he's not really stealing credit. He's just rewriting other writers to make it fit better with his vision of the show, which is really, kind of his prerogative as the creator and executive and producer. He could have done it, a little more diplomatically, but, and again, the way these things were contracted, especially with regard to that one story, it's like things were not quite handled right. So it's like, yeah, it may be a little sleazy, but Roddenberry was perfectly within the rules the way he did it. And probably the same thing with a lot of other scripts he did too. But it was also that moment that John D. F. Black decided, I'm not working here any longer. In fact, on the day his contract expired, him and then his secretary, later wife, Mary, it's like they popped champagne corks. I'm no longer working for Gene Roddenberry. But it's like originally it was like, where are they going to wind up? End of part one. That got snipped eventually because it's like there doesn't appear to be any kind of paper trail for who was going to write part two. There's nothing in John D. F. Black's thing that that indicate there was no assignment. It was like, and they were having problems just getting stuff made anyway. And when these things aired, it wasn't entirely up to the production. Okay, if it was, the Cobra Mount Maneuver would have aired first. But things happened. It's like they wound up. He only had like 5 episodes. But by the time September loomed large, you only had like 5 episodes ready to go. None of them were the ones you wanted. That'd go first. And that's why the Man Trap went first, because it was the closest thing you had that would serve as a halfway decent series premiere. Because the other ones that were there, Enemy Within, that's kind of creepy. You're portraying your lead character as as a sex offender. It's like, that's not a way to lead off. The Naked Time, it's like you have to know these characters better before you appreciate what they're going through. Charlie X was a teen angst thing and kind of weird. Mud's Women, it's mail order bride thing, and I think that maybe when you want it with the Man Trap, it's like, well, it's the closest thing we got. We got a monster, menacing the crew. Let's go with it. But it's like, the general legend was that the follow-up to The Naked Time was going to be Tomorrow's Yesterday. That's where we find out where that space warp winds up. Well, again, the timeline doesn't line up. Because when Dorothy was assigned that, Dorothy Fontana, when she was assigned that script, that doesn't line up with the time for there. And there's no way that, it was later in the season, there's no way they could have gotten that done in time to line up with The Naked Time. And there's also a memo where Bob Justman put out something where it's like way off the thing. It's like, and he kind of whining later, hey, shouldn't I be getting some credit? It was tongue-in-cheek memo, which is typical Bob Justman thing, where it's like, if he, maybe he should get some credit for like all our yesterdays or tomorrow's yesterday. I'd like to know about this thing, or I might have to sell this thing to Time Tunnel. And again, it was like this had already been set. So he's joking, obviously. Well, it's like part of the thing in trying to unravel some of the stories that have cropped up over the years and gotten taken off in lives of their own. It's like, not necessarily the case. There's a lack of documentation. A lot of this was probably just verbally said in the office, and egos were bruised accordingly. But it's like nobody bothered to write some of this stuff down. They were too busy trying to make the show. And what we got, it's like, all we really know is that Simon was made. And the thing is, John D. F. Black was not exclusive to Star Trek and Desley. He had a episode of Run for Your Life that was about that same time. And there was something about a movie, but there's no real thing that even got made. So, or it was delayed so long it took long, aired after. But it's like, for whatever reason, John D. F. Black was not delivering the way. There was also a dispute on his contributions to what wound up as the Menagerie. But even that wasn't really handled properly, and therefore the grievance of the Writers Guild went nowhere. The Desley offered a settlement. He refused. It's like, And there's a memo from Roddenberry that, look, he didn't do the job. He's doing $1,000 a week, and he didn't do the job he was supposed to be doing. And it's like, I had to do it. So what's he want to be paid for about something that wasn't even really his? So that didn't end well. It's remarkable that he was willing to speak for the extras on the original DVD set for the original series. Because I think in later years you realize, like, it sucked. It was a pain. He was an asshole, but in the end run, he was right. It's his show. It has to follow his vision. So it's like, kind of look at how the sausage was made. It ain't pretty. We don't necessarily have the recipe, but we know a little bit of the process, and it was ugly. And feelings got hurt. And unfortunately, all the particulars who knew what was going on are no longer around. And whether or not Dorothy saw, because she was still pretty much working as Gene's secretary, so she saw everything, including her office memos. So whether or not she saw Justman's idea about the Enterprise going back to Earth for something other and something weird happening or not, it's like she very well have saw it, but just the idea gets followed, and when it's time to do a script of her own, she forgot where she maybe realized she heard him somewhere else. It was just rattling around back of her head. It's a very hectic thing. It's like you said, going back to why Gene Coon and all that. By the end of the second, Gene Coon's brought in fairly later on here. It's because Steve Carabato was brought in as producers or story, but they started working on it and eventually settled on Gene Coon about halfway through for the first season, and made it through most of the second season before he basically on the verge of a nervous breakdown, really, because of one of the other episode, the last one I did that covers that. But it's like all this stuff, and that was always happening at the time that Gulf Western was smashing Paramount and Desilu into one big conglomerate and putting their nose in. When it's like, these people have no freaking clue. It's like, forget it. I'm out. I'm about ready to blow up anyway. I'm out. It's like Roddenberry was exhausted. Bob Justman was exhausted. And Gene Coon was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Well, and all said and done. This is a very demanding show from the get-go. Clearly, it's like, because Roddenberry's with the back-breaking hours to do it was shooting like 6-7 days to shoot an episode. Whereas typical ones maybe. Well, Mission Impossible had a similar problem because they had lost a story editor guy couple of guys who were the scripts. They would alternate. They were gone. Well, we have no strips now. They had to cobble together stuff for what they had, and the minor miracle they made it through the first year. So it wasn't necessarily unique to Star Trek, but it was certainly a problem with Star Trek because, again, we're talking major production issues here. And again, in that situation, you didn't necessarily have the opportunity to write everything down. So things may still surface. You never know. But for now, it's like, no, Tomorrow Was Yesterday was not going to be the sequel to The Naked Time. It's easy to see that looking back on it with just all you have is the episodes. And with the scant knowledge that, Tomorrow's Yesterday, The Naked Time did end on a cliffhanger, and the only other time travel thing to that point was Tomorrow's Yesterday. So, they link up. They could have. That wasn't the plan, though. That's just how it worked out. Okay. And if there had been a little more coordination about it, it's like, fine. I think I saw something about Dorothy Fontana said that, that was the idea, but it didn't work out because of production shit. But who knows how much, because this was years after it, if it's what she heard or whatever. But I hope that would be a little insight. It's like, this was a messy process. And while, again, Roddenberry could have handled it better, he wasn't necessarily wrong. So, And on that, we'll talk at you later.